Jack Carter was a teenager from a small town. He admired athletes but thought he could never be one. One day, Jack went to a local sports competition. There, he saw his idol, a brilliant athlete, competing. The athlete ran with such grace and power on the track. Jack felt inspired as he watched the athlete glide forward. His heart raced, and he felt a strong desire to shine, too. "I want to be like him," Jack thought, gripping the fence. That moment changed Jack. A new dream was born within him. He wanted to be an athlete who stood out, shining brightly. Jack told his classmates about his dream the next day. But they laughed, saying, "You, an athlete, that's impossible." Their words hurt, but Jack didn't let them break his spirit. He decided to train in secret, away from their mocking eyes. Every morning, before sunrise, Jack went to the park. The air was cool, and the town was quiet as he ran. His steps were slow at first, but he pushed himself harder. With every run, Jack felt a little stronger and faster. He didn't have proper equipment, but he used what he had. His old sneakers wore down, but he kept running anyway. At school, Jack stayed quiet about his training, staying focused. He avoided distractions and reminded himself of his dream. Jack's journey was lonely, but he felt determined to succeed. "Someday," Jack whispered to himself, "I'll show them all." He imagined himself on the track, running like his idol. The crowd cheered, and Jack felt the warmth of the spotlight. This dream fueled him, giving him strength on hard days. Jack didn't know how long it would take, but he was ready. Step by step, he moved closer to his goal, full of hope. Jack's journey as an athlete had just begun. Jack started his training with no idea what he was doing. He ran around the park, trying to improve his speed. Compared to his friends, Jack was fast, but not exceptional. Competitive athletes were on a completely different level. Jack's technique was clumsy, and his steps were uneven. He didn't have a coach, so he had to learn on his own. At school, his classmates kept mocking him for his dream. "Jack, you're wasting your time," they said with a laugh. Their words stung, but Jack refused to let them stop him. Every morning, Jack laced up his worn-out sneakers. He stepped outside and felt the cool air on his face. Jack focused on his breathing, timing each step carefully. He didn't see big changes at first, but he kept going. Each day, he noticed small improvements in his stamina. He learned to enjoy the quiet rhythm of running alone. Jack felt proud when he managed to run a little farther. Even though he wasn't the best, he loved the challenge. He started timing his runs, trying to beat his own records. The numbers on his watch motivated him to work harder. The teasing at school didn't matter as much anymore. Jack thought about his idol whenever he felt like giving up. "Someday, I'll be just as good," he whispered to himself. Jack's determination grew stronger with each passing week. He started looking up training tips online after school. Jack tried new exercises to improve his speed and balance. Some days were harder than others, but he didn't give up. Jack began to feel more confident, even though he was still learning. He smiled to himself, proud of how far he had come. The road ahead was long, but Jack was ready for the journey. With every step, Jack moved closer to achieving his dream. Jack's training had been slow and challenging for months. One afternoon, as he ran laps at the park, a man approached. The man introduced himself as Coach Thomas, a former athlete. He had seen Jack running and noticed his determination. "You've got potential, but you're doing it all wrong," he said. Jack was surprised but excited. Someone believed in him. Coach Thomas offered to train Jack, but there was a catch. "You must give it your all. No excuses," the coach warned. Jack eagerly agreed, ready to prove himself no matter the cost. The first training session was far harder than Jack expected. Coach Thomas had him running sprints and practicing his form. "Lift your knees higher, keep your arms steady," the coach yelled. By the end of the session, Jack was exhausted but determined. The coach's strict style pushed Jack beyond his comfort zone. Jack's speed began to improve after just a few weeks. His classmates still teased him, but Jack ignored their words. He focused on the progress he was making, little by little. Coach Thomas believed in Jack and reminded him of his goals. "Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard," he said. Jack repeated those words in his mind during every practice. The coach introduced new drills to improve Jack's technique. Each session was grueling, but Jack welcomed the challenge. Slowly, his running form became more polished and efficient. Coach Thomas pushed Jack harder than anyone ever had before. There were days when Jack felt like giving up, but he didn't. He thought about his dream, about the athlete who inspired him. Jack wanted to shine, just like his idol, and he kept going. Coach Thomas began to notice real improvement in Jack's ability. "You're getting faster, but you still have a long way to go." Jack nodded, determined to keep giving his best every day. With every session, Jack grew stronger, both physically and mentally. The road wasn't easy, but Jack was learning to enjoy the climb. He was no longer the boy who doubted himself months ago. Jack smiled as he ran, knowing he was on the right path. Jack's hard work was beginning to pay off in unexpected ways. He entered his first local competition and felt a mix of nerves and excitement. The other runners looked confident, their strides strong and practiced. As the race began, Jack pushed himself harder than ever before. His heart pounded as he focused on the finish line ahead. Although he didn't win, he placed third, a result that surprised him. Coach Thomas clapped him on the back, saying, "Good start, kid." Encouraged, Jack decided to enter more competitions in the area. With each race, he learned something new, how to pace himself better, how to breathe. His technique continued to improve under Coach Thomas's guidance. "Don't get too comfortable," the coach warned him after one win. "You still have a long way to go if you want to be the best." Jack took those words to heart, pushing himself even harder in training. The long runs and sprint drills were grueling, but he saw the results. His classmates began to notice his achievements, though some still mocked him. Jack stopped caring about their opinions, focusing only on his goals. At another competition, he managed to take second place, surprising everyone. The winner approached him afterward, saying, "You've got potential." Jack thanked him, feeling a new sense of confidence in his abilities. He still had moments of doubt, but Coach Thomas was always there. "Every setback is a step forward if you learn from it," the coach said. Jack replayed those words in his mind whenever he felt discouraged. The more he competed, the more he realized how much he still needed to grow. But the gap between him and the top athletes didn't seem impossible anymore. Jack began to enjoy the challenge, thriving under the pressure. Every finish line he crossed brought him closer to his dream. One evening, Coach Thomas showed him footage of elite runners. "Study their form, you'll see what sets them apart," the coach explained. Jack spent hours analyzing the videos, noting every detail. The next day, he applied what he'd learned, impressing the coach. "You're getting there, Jack," Coach Thomas said with a rare smile. Those words stayed with Jack, fueling his determination to improve. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he was ready for it. Jack wasn't just running anymore, he was chasing his dream. Jack looked around the arena, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. These weren't just competitors, they were the best of the best in the country. He adjusted his gear, his hands trembling slightly as he took a deep breath. "I've worked for this," Jack thought. "I belong here." Coach Thomas's voice echoed in his mind. "Focus on your own race, Jack." The whistle blew, and the athletes lined up on the track, their focus unwavering. As the starting gun fired, Jack pushed off with all the strength he had. The competition was fierce, every runner moving with precision and power. Jack felt the strain in his legs, but kept pushing, refusing to give up. His heart raced as he saw the gap between him and the lead group shrink slightly. "Don't think about them," he reminded himself. "Run your own race." The crowd roared, and Jack felt a surge of adrenaline as he neared the finish line. Though he didn't finish first, he knew this was his best performance yet. After the race, Jack sat on the grass, catching his breath, his chest rising and falling. A fellow runner approached, extending a hand. "Good race," they said. Jack smiled, shaking the hand. "Thanks. You were incredible out there." For the first time, he felt like he belonged among these elite athletes. Coach Thomas patted his shoulder. "Not bad, kid, not bad at all." Jack grinned, his confidence growing. "Thanks, coach. I'll do even better next time." That night, Jack reflected on the day, feeling both pride and hunger for more. He wasn't just chasing his dream anymore, he was proving he could achieve it. Jack closed his eyes, determined to push even harder tomorrow. Jack stepped onto the track for the second round, his nerves tightening. As he looked around, his eyes locked onto a familiar face: Max Reynolds. Max was everything Jack wasn't: confident, cocky, and already a star. Max shot Jack a sneer as he adjusted his gear, clearly dismissing him. "You don't belong here," Max muttered under his breath, barely looking at Jack. Jack felt the sting of the words, but clenched his fists, refusing to back down. He had come too far to let someone like Max intimidate him. As the race began, Max quickly surged ahead, his speed undeniable. Jack focused on keeping his pace, blocking out the voices in his head. Max's lead grew with every stride, but Jack didn't falter. He kept pushing. Then, to everyone's surprise, Jack made a sudden surge, gaining ground. Max glanced over, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face as Jack closed in. The crowd watched in awe as Jack continued to advance, refusing to give up. Though Jack didn't win, he finished strong, far surpassing what anyone expected. Max stormed off the track, clearly annoyed by Jack's unexpected performance. Jack stood tall, breathing heavily but with a sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the first time, he realized he was no longer an outsider in this world. The rivalry between him and Max had only just begun. Max may have won this time, but Jack was determined to keep up the fight. Later that night, Jack sat in his room, replaying the race in his mind. His muscles ached, but his mind was sharper than ever, focused on improving. Next time, Jack whispered to himself, "I'll be ready for him." Max may have underestimated him, but Jack wasn't going to let that happen again. As the days passed, Jack pushed himself harder, training with even more intensity. The thought of Max, always ahead, kept him motivated. Every time Jack felt exhausted, he imagined Max's sneer, and it pushed him further. The rivalry had sparked something inside Jack, a fire he hadn't known existed. The competition wasn't just about winning, it was about proving he belonged. And next time, when they faced off again, Jack would show Max what he was made of. Jack smiled to himself, knowing that every step brought him closer to his goal. The days leading up to the national finals were full of anticipation and nerves. Jack spent every moment training, determined to give his best performance yet. But as he warmed up during a practice run, something unexpected happened. Max, who had been watching from the sidelines, suddenly appeared in his path. With a swift motion, Max stuck his foot out, tripping Jack and sending him crashing to the ground. Pain shot through Jack's ankle as he hit the track hard, his breath catching in his throat. He groaned, clutching his ankle, feeling the sharp, agonizing pain flood his senses. Max stood over him, a smug grin on his face as he looked down at Jack. "Guess you're not good enough after all," Max sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Jack's mind spun. Was this really happening? Had Max really just done this? The pain in Jack's ankle was unbearable, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. He couldn't believe what Max had done. This wasn't just a rivalry, it was sabotage. As the trainers rushed to Jack's side, Max simply walked away, his laughter echoing in the distance. "Hope you enjoy watching the finals from the sidelines," Max called back over his shoulder. Jack couldn't respond. The only thing he could focus on was the searing pain in his ankle. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed what Jack feared. The injury was serious. "You'll need to rest for weeks, maybe even months," the doctor said gravely. Jack felt a sinking sensation in his chest. His dreams of the finals felt out of reach. His body had failed him, and he couldn't help but wonder if he would ever recover in time. The weight of the injury pressed heavily on Jack's mind. Could he overcome this setback? Max's words echoed in his ears, and the self-doubt crept in. Was he really good enough? The days turned into weeks, and Jack's frustration grew as he watched the others prepare for the finals. He was stuck at home, unable to do what he loved, while Max seemed to be thriving. Jack couldn't ignore the bitterness inside him. He wanted to be out there. He wanted to fight. But instead, he was sidelined, his dreams slipping further away with each passing day. One night, as Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe the setback wasn't the end. Maybe it was just another challenge to overcome. With that thought, a small spark of hope ignited in Jack's heart. He wouldn't give up. He may not be able to run right now, but he would come back stronger, no matter what. Jack closed his eyes, imagining the track, the competition, and the chance to prove himself. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jack knew one thing for sure: he wasn't done yet. Max might have thought he had won, but Jack was going to prove him wrong. Jack knew that recovery wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to fight through it. Coach Thomas was by his side every step of the way, encouraging him when he felt down. "This is just another challenge," Coach Thomas reminded him. "You've faced worse before." Jack nodded, but inside, the doubt still lingered. Was he strong enough to push through? The first few weeks were the hardest. Each day, Jack underwent intense physical therapy. The pain in his ankle was unbearable, and there were moments when he felt like giving up. But every time he wanted to stop, Coach Thomas would push him just a little harder. "Keep going," Coach would say. "Pain is temporary, but giving up lasts forever." Jack clenched his teeth, forcing himself to complete the exercises, despite the agony. His muscles ached, and every step felt like a battle, but he never let up. There were days when he wanted to collapse, when the weight of the recovery seemed too much. But Jack refused to let the fear of failure control him. He had a goal, and nothing would stop him. His ankle slowly began to heal, though the pain was still constant, lingering in the background. Each small victory, like walking without a limp, felt like a triumph in itself. The clock was ticking, and Jack knew he was running out of time. He had to be ready for the final race. Some days, he felt defeated, like his body just couldn't keep up with his dream. But when those thoughts crept in, Jack would remind himself of what he had already overcome. He wasn't going to let a setback define him. He would rise again, stronger than before. With each passing day, his confidence grew. The pain was still there, but so was his will. Jack's focus was sharper now. The finish line was in sight, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. He trained harder than ever, determined to give his best performance yet. Coach Thomas continued to push him, knowing that Jack needed to believe in himself again. "You've got this," Coach said one day. "You're ready, Jack. You've always been ready." Those words filled Jack with renewed strength. He wasn't just recovering, he was growing stronger. Jack could see the finish line now. The final race was close, and he would be there no matter what. The journey had been long, but every step had brought him closer to his dream. And as the day of the final race approached, Jack knew that he was ready for whatever came next. The day Jack returned to training, he felt both nervous and excited. It had been weeks since he had last stepped onto the track, and he knew he had lost precious time. He watched as his teammates trained with ease, their movements smooth and confident. Max, as always, seemed to be ahead of everyone, not even breaking a sweat. Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of the pressure on him. Could he really catch up in time? Coach Thomas noticed Jack's hesitation. and walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've made it this far, Jack. Don't let doubt hold you back now," Coach said, his voice firm. Jack nodded, but inside, the fear of failure still gnawed at him. He had so much to make up for. But as Coach began to push him through the drills, Jack could feel something stir inside him: determination. The exercises were hard, but Jack refused to stop. Every drop of sweat felt like progress. As the days passed, Jack's confidence slowly returned. He began to notice small improvements. His ankles still hurt, but it was manageable now, and his body was regaining its strength. Max, on the other hand, seemed unstoppable, but Jack wasn't about to let him intimidate him. Jack focused on his own path, his own journey, refusing to compare himself to Max. Every morning, Jack woke up early, putting in extra hours of training before anyone else arrived. The competition was fierce, but Jack's determination was his driving force. He wasn't giving up. He trained harder than ever, working on his weaknesses and refining his strengths. He knew that the national finals were fast approaching, and he had to be ready. Every setback, every moment of doubt, only made him push harder. Jack started to see the changes in himself. He was stronger, faster, and more focused than before. It wasn't easy, but Jack wasn't backing down. He had come too far to quit now. Each day, he felt himself getting closer to the person he wanted to be, the person who could win. The final race was approaching, and Jack knew it would be the biggest challenge of his life. But he wasn't afraid. He was ready to fight for his dream, no matter what it took. Max might have had the advantage, but Jack knew he had something even more powerful: heart. With each passing day, Jack's fire burned brighter. He was no longer the same person who had fallen. He was stronger, more determined, and ready to prove that he belonged in the competition. Jack was back, and this time, nothing was going to stand in his way. His comeback was just beginning, and he was going to give it everything he had. The road ahead was tough, but Jack was more than ready for the challenge. The day of the national finals arrived. Jack was nervous but ready to race. He stood next to Max, who looked very confident. Jack felt a little nervous. The race started. Max quickly took the lead and ran fast. Jack didn't panic. He kept running at his own pace. Max was far ahead, but Jack knew he had to stay strong. Jack was getting tired, but he kept pushing himself to keep going. He was getting closer to Max. He was catching up slowly. Max looked back and saw Jack was getting closer. He seemed surprised. Jack pushed harder, his legs hurting, but he kept going. The finish line was near. Jack was almost there. With all his strength, Jack ran faster and passed Max. The crowd cheered as Jack crossed the finish line first. Max stood behind, shocked and angry that he lost. Jack smiled as he stood on the podium. He had won the race. It had been a long journey, but Jack made it to the top. He knew this was just the beginning of his success. Jack felt proud. He had worked hard, and it had paid off. The medal around his neck was proof that dreams could come true. Jack stood on the podium, his heart racing with excitement. The crowd was cheering loudly. Jack had won the national finals. It wasn't just a race to him. It was the end of a long journey. Years of hard work and sacrifice had finally paid off. Coach Thomas smiled proudly from the sidelines. Max, who had once been so confident, was now silent. He couldn't believe Jack had beaten him. But Jack didn't care about Max anymore. He had proven something much bigger than winning. Jack had shown himself that no obstacle was too great. As Jack stood on the podium, he felt a sense of peace. His dream was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. Coach Thomas walked up to him, patting him on the back. "You did it, Jack," Coach said with a proud smile. Jack nodded, still in disbelief. He had worked so hard for this moment. Now that it had come, it felt even better than he imagined. The world had watched him, and Jack had shown them what he could do. He knew this was just the beginning of his journey. There was still more to achieve, more to prove. But now Jack was more confident than ever. He had done what people thought was impossible. And now, Jack Carter was a champion. The future was wide open, and Jack was ready for whatever came next. With Coach by his side, Jack knew anything was possible. This was just the first step, and the road ahead was his to conquer. Jack had won the race, but the journey was far from over.